Merry Christmas and happy holidays. Or I guess Happy New Year when this comes out. Today I have a very festive topic for us to celebrate the season. We're going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3, which I'm sure a lot of you will be playing in the basement of your family home, trying to avoid talking politics with your family. Why start a fist fight with your racist uncle when you could be flirting with a bear?
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
Today I want to talk about why Baldur's Gate 3 works, why it has been so successful. And I want to make the case that it all comes back to this idea of free will. Ho, ho, ho. If you, like me, bought and started playing Baldur's Gate 3 just this year, you may not be familiar with the other games in the franchise. So to give a Wikipedia level overview of the Baldur's Gate franchise as a whole, I'm going to do just that and look at Wikipedia. Don't come for me, H-Bomber guy. I'm being honest about it. The original Baldur's Gate came out in December of 1998 and was released by BioWare. Like most of the other games in the franchise, it was a fantasy role-playing game that used the same mechanics as D&D. Well, similar mechanics. There's some differences. The original Baldur's Gate tried its best to follow the rules of the second edition of D&D. That first game saw an expansion in April of 1999 called Tales of the Sword Coast, which added about 30 extra hours of gameplay. In September of 2000, BioWare released the follow-up Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amn. This game spawned a number of expansions and spin-offs and was the cornerstone? Tent pole was the, what's the word there? Was the, like the, it was like Mickey Mouse is to Disney. Or like, you know how there's like Doctor Who spin-offs, but Doctor Who is the, like the main one. Anyways, Baldur's Gate 2 remained the latest mainline game of the franchise until this year, 2023. So between the year 2000 and 2023, a mainline Baldur's Gate game was not released. So how did that happen? Why did it take 23 years for another mainline Baldur's Gate game to happen? Well, to get into that, we need to get into video game publishing. So the original Baldur's Gate game and its sequel, Baldur's Gate 2, was developed by BioWare. However, it was published by a video game publishing company called Interplay Entertainment. After the success of the second Baldur's Gate game, BioWare stepped away from the development side of Baldur's Gate and passed the torch over to a company called Black Isle Studios. Now, all the way back in 2003, Black Isle Studios had already begun plans for a Baldur's Gate 3. However, before the game could be fully developed, Interplay Entertainment pulled the plug. Black Isle Studios would then shift focus to another Baldur's Gate spin-off series called The Dark Alliance. They would complete Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2 in 2003 when they were going to be working on Baldur's Gate 3. However, that would also be shut down. All development on any Baldur's Gate properties were halted completely. This was because of a lawsuit between Interplay Entertainment and another game development company called Snowbind. See, Snowbind had worked on the first Dark Alliance spin-off game and still held the trademark for Dark Alliance. So when Interplay went to Black Isle to ask them to develop Dark Alliance 2, Snowbind was like, well, wait a second, you don't have the rights to that. So the Dark Alliance trademark went back to Snowbind, but the Baldur's Gate trademark went to Atari? Does Atari own BioWare? Or does Atari own... Wait. Okay, this is all very confusing. I think Atari owns it because they have merged with Hasbro, and Hasbro owns D&D? I don't know. Atari has the trademark now of Baldur's Gate. Video game production is a mess. A web of capitalist spiders. Okay, I found this message board on hold on. There we go. Whoa. Well, I found this message board called Beamdog. It's a gaming message board, and a user named Illidith posted in August 2013 that Info Games Inc., which is Atari, owns the electronic license and distribution license to electronic D&D games. The IP license came from BioWare, while the electronic distribution rights came from Interplay through Atari. So if you can make sense of that, great. Sorry, we're talking too much about this. I'm getting way off track here. Anyways, by 2003, Baldur's Gate was kind of dead in the water. However, in 2007, the president of Obsidian Entertainment, a different production company, Fergus Ukert, approached Atari and asked them for permission to develop a game in the Baldur's Gate franchise. They turned him down. More attempts to develop future Baldur's Gate games were made by Brian Fargo, who was actually the founder of Interplay Entertainment. However, these further developments also failed, and Brian really only ended up spearheading enhanced remakes of those first two original games. Now, that brings us to Larian Studios. All the way back in 2014, when Larian was a brand new studio that had just released their debut game, Divinity: Original Sin, they approached Atari and Wizards of the Coast. They own D&D. We're not getting into that. To ask if they could be trusted with the Baldur's Gate franchise. At the time, Wizards of the Coast believed that Larian was still too new to the gaming industry and did not feel they could be trusted with such a big property. Such a big property, which had not been touched in 20 years. Well, not 20 years at that point, you know what I mean. 3 years later, in 2017, Larian developed the sequel to Divinity: Original Sin, Divinity: Original Sin 2, and sent pre-release materials for that game to Wizards of the Coast to try to make another bid. This time, Wizards of the Coast was impressed with their work and gave them the green light. Thus began work on Baldur's Gate 3, which just came out in August of this year, 2023. Now, if you do the math on that, that means this game had been in development for 6 years, which by gaming industry standards is a long time. And it shows. Baldur's Gate 3 is wildly popular. People that you wouldn't typically consider RPGers are flocking to this game. I have friends who have never expressed any interest in anything D&D, tabletop role-playing, video games in general, who spend hours a day playing this game. It most recently just won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, which was hosted by Gonzo. So why is this game so massively popular? I mean, okay, to address the bear in the room, it's the sex stuff. It plays a part. It plays a role. It's a very sexy game, and that definitely pulls people in for sure. But I don't think that's all there is to it, because there's lots of sexy games out there. I think this game is different than other video games other people may have been exposed to. Part of the general appeal of gaming is being able to put yourself in the shoes of a great adventurer, where you're in control, to a certain extent. Now, of course, you can't be in total control in a video game, right? There has to be guardrails, or else the game would always be in development, or the story that it wants to tell would never be told. I would argue that Baldur's Gate 3 comes as close to being a guardrail-less game as anything I've ever seen before, which is probably part of the reason it was in development for 6 years. And also part of the reason it has some quirks that are being fixed, but just quirks. It's a massive game. The ability to kind of do anything with limited guardrails is one of the biggest appeals of Dungeons and Dragons. It really is a game of imagination, thinking critically, solving puzzles in creative ways. However, if you've ever been a part of a D&D campaign, you know that comes with some hiccups. Whenever you're playing with other humans, things can get tense. One member of the party might want to go do that, another member of the party might want to go do that. And that's honestly part of the charm, is working out those conflicts. However, there's also scheduling conflicts, which means you might not be playing D&D more than once a month or even once a year. Baldur's Gate 3 is D&D without those scheduling conflicts. I'm not saying it's a replacement for D&D. Like I said, those personal connections with other players is part of what makes it so great. What I am saying is, if you want to get that D&D fix on a more regular basis, there you go. Ooh, guys, it's time to be real. Be real. And like with D&D, you can just be a bastard if you want to. One of my favorite examples of how Baldur's Gate lets you do anything you want to is how you handle the Grove at the beginning of the game. Now, if you've never played Baldur's Gate 3, let me set the scene. During the beginning of the game, you come across a grove that is run by druids. Recently, the Druid Grove has been hosting a group of traveling tiefling refugees. Tensions are high between the two groups, and only made worse by the fact that the Grove is constantly under siege by a group of goblins. Now, if you talk to the tieflings, they're going to tell you the only way to solve the situation is to go murder Kalga. Kalga is the stand-in leader of the druids. Their usual leader, Halsin, has gone missing. Now, the reason the tieflings want to have you go murder Kalga is because Kalga's plan to relieve the stress on the Grove is to kick out the tieflings and send them on their way. In addition to kicking out the tieflings, she's going to perform a ceremony that will close off the Grove to any outsiders. She made this decision in the absence of Halsin, who I just mentioned is missing. Now, if you go talk to Kalga, she's going to tell you the only way to fix the problem is to lead the tieflings out of the Grove so that she can complete the ceremony. So, to a new player, you might be thinking, all right, so I need to pick a side. These are my two options. But if you keep exploring outside of the Grove, you eventually come across the Goblin Camp. At the Goblin Camp, you discover a couple of things. The first thing you discover is that the cause of all these goblins besieging the Grove is a drow named Minthara. Now, if you go and talk to Minthara, she's going to ask you to help the goblins in destroying the Grove. Now, something new players may or may not know is if you do help Minthara destroy the Grove, she will then join your party and become a romanceable character. And considering what she looks like, it can be tempting for some. The other thing you discover at the Grove is Halsin, the true leader of the druids. Halsin has been kidnapped by the goblins and is trapped in his bear form. If you free Halsin, he will ask that you dispose of all of the goblin leaders, including Minthara, so that he can go back to the Grove and resolve everything there. Now, clearly, if you're playing if you're playing as a good guy, if you're playing as a just character, you're probably going to go dispose of the goblin leaders, including Minthara, and have Halsin go back and take care of things at the Grove. This is the correct way to do things. However, you can also murder Halsin. Or you could tell Halsin, yeah, sure, I'll go kill Minthara, go back to Minthara, and have her go send her troops to the Grove and slaughter everyone. You clear the goblin camp, creating a safer road for the tieflings to travel on, and go back to the Grove, where you'll discover that Halsin has stopped the ceremony, leaving the Grove open to everyone, and punishing Kalga.
Took it upon yourself to undertake the Rite of Thorns. I ought to exile you from this place. Forever. Instead, I shall listen to the explanation that you owe me.
I owe you nothing. Goblins swarmed us like roaches while you stumbled after the past. You chose to abandon us. I chose to protect us.
Silence! The rite has been ended. I will allow you to stay, but consider yourself a novice anew.
The tieflings are packing up their stuff to make their way to the city of Baldur's Gate now that the roads are safe. That night, you have a huge party back at your camp with all the tieflings and Halsin. From that point on, Halsin will join your camp and later on become a playable character. Yay! Now, if you choose to help Minthara, the game makes you live with that choice. If you choose to help Minthara, you go with her to the Grove, and you are forced to take part in the slaughter of the tieflings, including the children. And the game really makes you live with that choice. It does not pull its punches when it comes to the violence that it forces you to partake in if you make that decision. It gives you that free will to be the bastard if you want to. But you have to live with those consequences. If you assist Minthara in slaughtering the tieflings and druids at the Grove, instead of the joyous tiefling party that happens at your camp if you assist the tieflings and Halsin, you're met with a party of goblins at your camp, who spend the evening gloating about how many innocents they cut down that day. But on the plus side, you also get Minthara to join your camp. Up until very recently, patch 5, the only way to get Minthara into your camp was to slaughter everyone at the Grove. And if you didn't know that would be the outcome of each of those decisions, that decision would create 2 entirely different games for the player. And speaking of not being able to recruit Minthara, you can go the whole game not recruiting anyone to your party. You might not make it very far, but you could do it. It would be very difficult. My first playthrough, I didn't pick up lae'zel until nearly Act 3 because I just missed her. I just walked right past where she was. And that means I never went to the creche. I never talked to the god, her queen, any of that. Just because I didn't walk past a certain corner of the map. Which now on my second playthrough, where I do have lae'zel, I realized made a completely different gaming experience. Or another example, in Act 2, you need to figure out how to lift a shadow curse from the area surrounding your goal, Moonrise Towers. As you make your way through the shadow cursed lands, you and everyone in your party is going to be cursed, which gets very annoying. As you're stumbling through these shadow cursed lands, trying not to die, you stumble across a sanctuary called the Last Light Inn, which has been spared by the shadow curse by a cleric named Isobel. Now, my first playthrough, you also learn that all of the tieflings, if you had saved them from the Grove, are now staying at the Last Light Inn. Now, my first playthrough, I was told by another character that the only way to walk through the shadow cursed lands and not deal with this annoying curse was to talk to Isobel, who is the cleric who's protecting the Last Light Inn, and she would bless me. I did not know that if I went to talk to Isobel, it would kick off a sequence of events where she is kidnapped. And that obviously lifts the protection of Last Light Inn. Everyone at the Last Light Inn becomes cursed and becomes aggressive, and you have to fight all of them. I safe scummed that round. It's only after exploring the area outside of the last light inn a little bit more that I discovered a lantern holding a pixie that basically achieves the same thing and lets you walk through the Shadow Cursed lands without having to deal with that annoyance. But even within picking up the lantern, you can then choose to free the pixie, to keep the pixie. You could also actually rescue Isabel. There's so many options here. And not only can you make yourself a bastard character, you can make your companions bastard characters too. Especially everyone's favorite bitey boy, Astarion. See, Astarion wants to become a vampire king, or whatever. And near the end of the game, if you have been romancing Astarion and you then let him ascend into this uber vampire, he gets aggressive. You'll still be in a relationship, he'll still claim to love you, but the dynamic has definitely become toxic.
Don't be stupid, darling. You're mine. Remember, the tadpole is gone, which means your future is mine to decide. How lucky you are that I chose you as my consort. Chose you to help me take Baldur's Gate, then sit by my side as I rule it. There's no backing out now. We'll be together forever. I can promise you that.
Whereas if you do not allow him to ascend to vampire lorddom, the romance scene after those events is very tender and sweet. This game has millions of options, millions of outcomes. All of them, it's impossible to know about. Earlier this year, I played the Mass Effect trilogy, and I really liked it. But I noticed that a lot of the choices they had you make did not actually have real consequences. Sure, in the moment, things would change, characters would regard you differently, but at the end of the day, a lot of it didn't really matter. Baldur's Gate 3 has gotten me thinking about games that market themselves as games where your choices matter. Like, do you remember when Life is Strange came out? And they really pushed that butterfly effect thing. It's like, oh, the simplest decision that you make early on in the game could have drastic effects on the later plot. Do you remember how disappointed you were when that game came out? And you realized, yeah, it has an effect on things, but there's really not that many options. With Baldur's Gate 3, there are that many options. It's the first time I've played a video game and really felt that I have free will, which is why you can spend hundreds of hours playing it. I spent an embarrassingly long time on my first playthrough of the game. When I started my second playthrough, from the get-go, it was a completely different playing experience because I played my first run-through as a bard and played my second run-through as a sorcerer. The tiniest decisions can make the biggest difference. And I still, after hours of playing this game, see people talking about outcomes I never imagined could happen. And I think that's why the game has been such a success. In a real world where you can feel that you lack control, Baldur's Gate 3 lets you step into a fantasy where you really get to call the shots. Anyways, sorry this video was late. I was playing Baldur's Gate 3. Hi guys, sorry it took me 2 months to put out a video. I don't even have an excuse. It's just the weather changed and brain rot, yeah. But, you know, if you liked this video, you could give a little thumbs up. You could subscribe, maybe. If you want to support the channel, links to my Patreon and some merch are in the description. Ooh, yay. And if you didn't like the video, I get it. You're on your dirge run. Bye. Over the last couple